Hello and welcome to Bounding into Comics. My name is John Trent. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding into Comics. Today I got a story about Jon Favreau seemingly confirming that The Mandalorian will indeed lead to the sequel trilogy. So, The Mandalorian creator and executive producer Jon Favreau recently sat down for an interview with the Writers Guild of America. Favreau opened up about the show, how it came about, and his writing process going forward. The interview peels back the curtain on what Favreau had planned from the beginning when he first pitched the show to Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy, and how he plans to move the show forward into the future. First, Favreau detailed he pitched a story that would get back to the basics of Star Wars. He explained, "Yeah, I had a pitch for a concept of following the archetypes that influenced George Lucas, whether it was the Western, the samurai film, the World War II film, earlier space operas, cliffhangers, Flash Gordon. Looking at the films and the archetypes that influenced George was a way for us to make a smaller story that would work for the scale of the small screen and get back to the basics. My pitch was very simple at first, and Kathy Kennedy was receptive to the ideas I was presenting." Later in the interview, Favreau was asked about whether the return of Luke Skywalker as seen in the Season 2 finale was always planned out. He answered, "No. The story unfolded as I wrote it. The Mandalorian inherits a great deal from existing Star Wars stories, and when I write, that context is always a consideration." Favreau then insinuated that he is indeed taking the sequel trilogy into consideration, saying, quote, "It became clear that within the established continuity, certain things were likely to transpire." In a follow-up question, he would be specifically asked if he felt penned in narratively, given the sequel trilogy reveals Luke's future. Favreau replied saying, quote, "We have a tremendous amount of freedom afforded to us because of the gap in time between the films. Dave Filoni and I are in constant discussion regarding how each story choice is impacted by and would impact existing Star Wars material." So I would be remiss without pointing to Favreau's previous comments before The Mandalorian even came out. So back in September 2019, Favreau spoke with Entertainment Weekly and intimated that the show would lead to the First Order. He said, "Also, what could happen in the 30 years between celebrating the defeat of the Empire and then the First Order? You come in on episode 7, the First Order are not just starting out, they're pretty far along. So somehow things weren't necessarily managed as well as they could have been if the galaxy ended up in hot water again like that." So he had said that even before the show came out, that they were progressing towards the sequel trilogy and the First Order. So getting back to this WGA interview, as it progressed, Favreau did credit himself for much of The Mandalorian's writing. He said, "You have to be very prolific in this new medium because so much writing is required when you're putting that many hours television on the air. It requires creativity, which is a lot different than the burnishing of one piece of material as you do for theatrical. Here, it's a river of writing, and it's not something where I have a big writing staff. I've taken on a lot of that responsibility myself, which isn't to say that it's not a collaborative process, but the actual typing out of it, where the rubber hits the road, ends up falling on your shoulders when you're staring at your computer." He continued saying, "Having an understanding of how story fits into not just our series, but the Star Wars universe, that's something that requires a very collaborative approach. That collaboration is what inspires me to be able to go home and type and write scenes. We found a very interesting, cool balance that's about as fulfilling as anything I've ever worked on in my whole career." So even there, he's intimating that he's fitting the story into the Star Wars universe, which includes the sequel trilogy. Later in the interview, he does credit his other collaborators, saying, "Even though my name is on a lot of the episodes, realize that there's a whole supportive creative community around this project, whether it's people who are reading and giving notes, or people who are helping me research, or people who are making drawings, or directors that are interpreting it, or editors that are ultimately rewriting it later through the editorial process with us. There are a lot of hands." But even then, he does state that it all starts with him. He says, "There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but the actual sitting down and tapping out the work is where much of it starts." So one of the more interesting moments of the interview is Favreau claims he doesn't really have a plan for the series and is writing it as he goes. He kind of mentioned that when he was talking about Luke. He said here, "No, the story unfolded as I wrote it." So he would kind of elaborate on that later on in the interview. And before we get to that, I do want to point out, if you recall, Rian Johnson revealed to the New York Times back in 2017, before The Last Jedi released, that the sequel trilogy was not planned out as well. So in that interview, Johnson said, "I had figured there would be a big map on the wall with the whole story laid out, and it was not that at all. I was basically given the script for episode 7. I got to watch dailies of what JJ was doing, and it was like, where do we go from here? That was awesome." Johnson would then be asked if there was anyone telling him that certain plot points needed to be included, and he answered nothing like that. But it's the second film in a trilogy. The first film got these characters here. The second movie has to dig into and challenge these characters. I wanted this to be a satisfying experience unto itself. I didn't want it to end with a ... question mark. He would then go on to imply that he didn't really even consult J.J. Abrams about the Last Jedi. He said, "If I had questions, what did you think this was going to be? What were your ideas for this? I could always ask him, but those questions only address what these characters want and how they get there." Notice he says, "I could always ask him." He doesn't say he asked him at all. It's pretty clear to me in this answer that he didn't consult Abrams at all. But Johnson continued saying, "Take the question of who Rey's parents are. If you get the information, oh, it's that. Who really cares?" A lot of Star Wars fans cared. I know a lot of people care. Like, he even says that who cares, and then he says, "I know a lot of people really care," but it's interesting as opposed to impactful. Now, what is my place in the world? Where do I come from? Where do I belong? Okay, I understand what the weight of that is. We could play with those questions and their answers to have the biggest emotional impact on these characters. Johnson would then go on to reveal it was up to him to figure out Luke Skywalker's story for The Last Jedi. This is just kind of emphasizing how there was no plan for the sequel trilogy. And so Johnson says, "That was the first thing I had to figure out. Why is Luke on that island? And I didn't have any answers." That's obvious from The Last Jedi. But it's not like you can just pick anything you want out of the air. I grew up having a sense of who Luke Skywalker is. The Last Jedi proves you didn't. But he says, "It guides you to a very specific path. I know he's not hiding on the island. That's exactly what he was doing in The Last Jedi. I know he's not a coward. That's exactly how you portrayed him in The Last Jedi. He must be there for a reason that he believes in." No, he's not. He wasn't. "You're finding a path forward, but there end up being fewer choices than you think." So obviously he's lying through his teeth here, because it's September. The movie came out in December. He knew what was going on. He wrote the script. So he's obviously lying there. So I guess that throws into doubt his claims about the sequel trilogy having a plan. But there's also stuff like with Abrams, and then you even have the Abrams editing crew went on a podcast and basically said that Johnson specifically went out to undo the plot threads from The Force Awakens. So there's comments on that. So I think there's some truth to him saying that there's no plan there. I think that was apparent too, just based on watching the movies. So Favreau's comments to the WGA are very similar. When discussing the concept art shown at the end of each episode of The Mandalorian and how it pulls the curtain back on the writing process, Favreau stated, "We also made the choice to not edit out things that didn't make it to air or that changed. So it really shows the writer's notes and this idea of this ongoing pulpy writing process whereby you're creating the story as you go and people are waiting for the next chapter to come out. We think about it as novels or books, but there's something really pure about this back and forth between an audience and storytellers that seems in a weird way through technology to emulate the campfire storytelling. I really like the back and forth with the audience, and I love the back and forth with the artists, directors, and other people that I'm collaborating with. I'm writing for other directors most of the time, and that's something I've never experienced either." Favreau goes on to detail that the story he is writing is actually being influenced by audience feedback. He says, "In this case, there's a feedback loop that's so immediate that it's actually affecting the way that you're writing moving forward based on what you're seeing and also the feedback from the audience." He continues saying, "In this immediate world of streaming where it goes out there and you get immediate feedback is so different than movies where you can sit in the back of the theater or read reviews. Here, there's a conversation that's flowing around you, and it just depends to what extent you want to bend your ear to that or isolate yourself from it, depending on what will most fully support you creatively. Some people like to wall themselves off, which I do, which I sometimes do, and some people like to really just wade into it. Now you can listen to every water cooler in every office, essentially thanks to the internet. So I think he's being completely truthful here. I think the biggest evidence of that in The Mandalorian is the fact that the fobs were completely removed from season 2 after fans completely obliterated them and pointed out how absolutely stupid they were. So you did not see any of that in season 2. I think they also, bringing back Luke Skywalker was also, I do think, listening to the fans there. So that's a little bit of different from what Johnson did, where he basically ignored the fans, and his comments prove that with the New York Times. Whereas Favreau seems to be actually like listening to fan feedback. So there is a little bit of a difference, but the writing style seems to be kind of off the cuff, so to say, where the story is developing as it goes. But we do know that it is going to end up with the sequel trilogy. He implies that in this interview, and he made that abundantly clear, I believe, in that Entertainment Weekly interview, where he says he's going to be addressing the First Order and its creation. So I do want to point this out to close things out. He does separate himself from how Lucasfilm employees typically behave. Favreau understands and seemingly respects his audience and says it's something he learned while working for Marvel, notably before they were bought by Disney. He says, there's something really cool about putting a small sample of what you're doing out there to your core audience and seeing if they are sparked to it. Because at the end of the day, it's a conversation with that audience. And those fans are who you're speaking to. And if you're doing something that they're not feeling, you're not doing your job right. And I do think that does differentiate himself from most Lucasfilm employees. But with that being said, at the end of the day, The Mandalorian is ending with the sequel trilogy, and it's abundantly clear that Star Wars fans have completely rejected the sequel trilogy on multiple fronts, whether it's in the theaters, whether it's with the merchandise, whether it's with any other Star Wars products such as Solo. Fans have openly rejected the sequel trilogy, and if you're creating a product that leads to that, no matter how respectful you want to be of the fans, it's still building to something that takes a dump on those fans. So I'm interested in what you think about Favreau's comments. Let me know in the comments below. My name is Jon Trent, and you've been watching Bounding in the Comics. I'll have another video for you tomorrow.